As we approach the summer movie season, I figured it is time for us to take a trip back in time 40 years ago to one of the greatest years ever in movie history, where just some of the best sequels ever came out and so many original movies that spawned franchises started. So let's go ahead and hop in our time machine and jet back to 1984 as we count down our top 10 movies of that year. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Cinema Sermons. My name is Kevin, and today I'm counting down my top 10 picks of my favorite films from the year 1984. The 80s is my favorite decade of all time. The music, the movies, the hair, chicks with big teased up hair, and everything was just over the top, and I loved it. Most of my favorite franchises started in the 80s. Most of my favorite TV shows, my favorite TV show ever is Psych, and all that does is reference 80s movies and stuff like that, man. I still listen to 80s music all the time. Metallica is my all-time favorite band. I love this decade. And 1984 was one of the best years ever in movie history, especially for original films. So as we approach the summer blockbuster season, let's count down all the way from 10th best to first best of, my favorite movies of 1984. Let's get it. Yeah! But I will throw in an honorable mention here, and that honorable mention is Conan the Destroyer. So it doesn't quite crack the top 10 list, but I definitely thought it was worth talking about. Arnold Schwarzenegger does a great job in this role being Conan. It's the second film in the franchise. The first one was Conan the Barbarian. We always hoped that they would make a third one where he would be King Conan. They just never got around to it, but Conan the Barbarian is definitely an honorable mention. All right! So coming in at number 10 is Footloose. This is not one of my favorite films, but it is so iconic that I just had to talk about it. You could be listening to the radio on a Friday now in 2024 and you'll still hear Footloose be playing because it just created a movement where everyone knows this movie, everybody loves it, everybody knows the song. And it's just a classic of the 80s. It's one of those icons that you have to acknowledge. So coming in at number 10 is Footloose. Coming in at number 9 is Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter. This was the fourth film in the Friday the 13th franchise, which dominated most of the 1980s. In the 10 years of that decade, there were 7 Friday the 13th films released, and out of all of the schlocky slashers that were coming out around then, Friday the 13th was king for most of the 80s until Freddy Krueger came along, which we will talk about. And this was supposed to be the final chapter, the end of the franchise. It is widely regarded as one of the best in the franchise. I do agree that it is indeed one of the best, and it is number 9 for my pick of best movies of 1984. Number 8 is going to be the action comedy smash hit Beverly Hills Cop. This year, 40 years later, we are getting the fourth film in the franchise, starring Eddie Murphy as Axel Foley, seeing this Detroit cop in this setting. There's so many iconic scenes, the banana in the tailpipe, it's so quotable. It's one of Eddie Murphy's best movies, which is saying something because he dominated the 80s as well. And for him to really just go out of strictly comedy, but into action comedy and do it so well, Beverly Hills Cop is awesome. It's again, just all of these movies that I'm naming are absolutely iconic. Number 7, Wolverines! Number 7 is going to be Red Dawn, starring Patrick Swayze. Who's that dude who went crazy talking about tiger blood and Adonis DNA? Charlie Sheen. Charlie Sheen's in this movie. Jennifer Grey, the hot mom from Back to the Future. What's her name? Leah Thomas. That's her name. Leah Thompson. Sorry, my bad. Leah Thompson. This movie has a star-studded cast. It is just such a phenomenal story about, it goes into the Red Scare and communism and basically the Cold War of, Russia and Cuba teaming up and invading mainland United States. I believe it takes place in Colorado, which is where I am from. So yeah, just a band of Coloradans getting together and fighting back to protect their homeland. Dude, I absolutely love it. Red Dawn is one of the quintessential action films of the 80s, and it came out in this just amazing year of 1984. So number 7, Wolverines, Red Dawn. Number 6 is gonna be the movie that introduced us to the man of the dreams, the one with the finger knives slashing through the silver screen, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Like I said, there was just a ton of slasher movies coming out in the 80s, and horror master icon Wes Craven came out with A Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984 that revolutionized the slasher genre, and it was no longer just a mass killer, but it gave us Freddy Krueger, who's an absolute icon. Nancy Thompson is one of the greatest final girls of all time, and this movie introduced us to Johnny Depp. It was his first film role ever, and it spawned this franchise that is still going to this day. It is an absolute icon. Freddy Krueger in A Nightmare on Elm Street, slashing his way through the silver screen in 1984. Number 5 is going to be Ghostbusters. Dude, I'm telling you, man, I just keep listing off hit after hit, icon after icon. 1984, I would have been in the theater every freaking weekend. But number 5 is Ghostbusters. This has an all-star comedy cast of Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, and Ernie Hudson coming together to tell this horror comedy story of these guys, these scientists who get together and start hunting and collecting ghosts. This movie is just comedy gold. It's Bill Murray at his peak. So many memorable scenes, quotable one-liners. Everybody knows who the Ghostbusters are. And we even got another sequel that came out earlier this year. 40 years later, this franchise is still going, and it started this year. It's just an absolutely fun movie. I watch it every year around Halloween. Ghostbusters is an absolute icon. That comes in for me at number 5. Number 4 is another annual watch for me, and that is Gremlins. So it actually came out in the summertime, but this is absolutely a Christmas movie, man. It blurs that line of horror comedy so perfectly. Everyone was in love with Gizmo. My mom was a kid when this movie came out, and she told me that she had a little toy stuffed Gizmo. She still loves Gizmo to this day. My sisters love Gizmo. My nieces love Gizmo. Everybody loves Gizmo, dude. Me and my brother would always laugh at Stripe and just how mean he was, and just the gremlins and the chaos that they cause and ensue. And I had grown up watching this movie, but I hadn't watched it in about 20 years until 2 years ago. And I was watching it with my mom and my stepdad, and Phoebe Cates comes on the screen. And like I said, like last time I had watched this, I was a kid. I wasn't into girls yet. So we're watching Gremlins, and I'm like, are we just gonna pretend like this chick isn't way hot? And they're like, oh yeah, that's Phoebe Cates. Your Uncle John had a poster over on his wall. I'm like, well, way to go, Uncle John, because Phoebe Cates had it going on in 1984. So that was always really cool. I love watching that movie for that reason too. But it's just a ton of fun, man. It is a good break from, you know, the traditional Christmas movies. It's an annual watch for me. I love this movie. Coming in at number 4 is Gremlins. Number 3 is The Karate Kid. Again, just another absolute icon of the decade. And here we are, still waiting for the conclusion of Cobra Kai. Dude, I'm telling you, the movies that came out this year spawned so many franchises, and these were all original ideas. What it would have been like to be alive in that time would have been so cool. But I have not ever met one person who does not like The Karate Kid. This is a director, it was directed by 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞, who directed the original Rocky, my favorite film of all time. And he creates another just timeless underdog classic tale where you fall in love with Daniel and Mr. Miyagi, and even the love story that comes in there, and it spawned another franchise. Like I said, Cobra Kai is going on now, which is a great show and puts a new spin on it, but that original movie is just pure 80s cheese and everything you want from it, man. Dude, there's no getting around it. It's a bona fide classic, man. Number 3 is The Karate Kid. All right. Down to the last 2. Before I give you my final 2, please hit that like, share, and subscribe button. It helps out the channel tremendously. So these last 2 were really hard for me to kind of place where they're at, and they're kind of interchangeable because one is a sequel that I definitely revisit more than the other, and the other one is the start of a franchise, and I love them both for different reasons, and I watch them when I'm in different moods. When I'm wanting, like, I want to feel a little bit happier and more adventure, I want to watch it, but then I just want to watch something just a little bit thought-provoking and heavy, but just a good movie. Like, I don't know, man. They're both just right there. But because it is a sequel and the original came out a few years ago, or a few years prior, for number 2, my top 10 movies of 1984, I'm gonna have to go with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Now, this is probably more of a favorite movie of mine than number 1 is, but like I said, it's a sequel. Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of my favorite films of all time. That is absolutely my favorite movie of the year that came out, which I think was 1982, which is hard because Rocky 3 came out that year. I want to do a whole series of every year of the 80s on this, man, but we're starting with 84. Anyway, Temple of Doom is one of my favorite movies of all time. I did a full review on it. I'll put a card up here somewhere so you can see that. Adventure has a name, and that name is Indiana Jones. And this is definitely the darker take of Indiana Jones, but in what, in my opinion, is a perfect trilogy. This is the darker middle section of that trilogy, and we get to see Indy really become the hero of the story, and I absolutely love Temple of Doom, man. It is one of my favorite films ever. I've been watching it my whole life, Coming in at number 2, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. But coming in at number 1, the best film of 1984 is The Terminator. This movie is a sci-fi action slasher love story that combined all these different genres and not only spawned a franchise, but just started this whole idea of time travel and fate and time circles. There's so much that goes into this, and this really kick-started and started the career of James Cameron, who holds like 3 of the top 4 highest grossing films of all time. And this movie is just absolutely fantastic. Terminator 2 is straight up an action film. Terminator 1, like I said, is probably more of a slasher if you give him a knife instead of a gun, but it's this unstoppable monster that is hunting this girl. And I do plan on doing a full review on Terminator, so I don't want to get too far into it, but man, it is absolutely one of the best films of that year. In my opinion, it is the best film of 1984. Arnold Schwarzenegger created an iconic character, an iconic movie, an iconic story, and in this whole decade full of iconic films, I've used the word iconic way too much, but what are you gonna do? Nothing! That's what you're gonna do. Don't, please, I'm just kidding. Don't click off this channel, don't. Sorry. Anyway, coming in at number 1 for me is The Terminator. Alright, my friends, that is all I have for today. Please let me know down in the comments your favorite film of 1984. What year do you think rivals 1984 when it comes to best movies that had come out, especially original ideas? Are there some on here that are some of your favorites that I missed? Let me know down in the comments. Do you want to see me hit all the other years in the 80s? I'm probably going to do 1985 next year, but that means we already have 3 other years, or 4, 80, 81, 82, 83. Yeah. We have 4 other years that I can go ahead and do a backlog on, which I would love to, because like I said, it is my favorite decade of all time. Some of my favorite movies ever came out of that decade. So if you want to see me brag on the 80s and talk about a top 10 list of every movie from the 80s, and then I can rank all of the number 1s and do that in a ranking, let me know. I'm probably going to do it anyway, man. I love the 80s. Please hit that like, share, and subscribe button. It helps out the channel tremendously. And remember, I love you. Jesus loves you. That's our story, and we're sticking to it. See you guys.